Commissioner Carr, what spurred this tweet? Why now?
Well, at the Federal Communications Commission where I work, we've been really focused on 5G for about 2 years now and getting the U.S. ready for this really transformative from a technology and an economic perspective as well. And there's a U.S. delegation going to Barcelona at the end of this week where we're going to be talking some more about 5G.
But how should we understand the meaning of his tweets? His statement that the U.S. should win through competition, not by blocking advanced technology, seems to conflict with reports that the White House may be doing an executive order to block telecommunications companies like Huawei.
Yeah, there's a couple issues going on here. One, when you look at this global race to 5G and which country is going to be first to deploy this new technology, China has a very different system than the U.S. does in terms of command and control. In the U.S., what we've been focused on is trying to get the government out of the way and let our private sector invest and compete. And at the FCC, we've been updating our regulations to help spur the private sector's investment and deployment of 5G.
But is there anything in those tweets that suggests a softer stance towards Huawei?
I wouldn't know the president's thinking on those particular tweets, but we've been very active, whether it's in Congress through legislation. The White House hosted a 5G summit earlier in the year. And at the FCC, we're also taking action to try to see more of this 5G deployment. There were 14 cities that saw 5G deployed last year, and we're expecting to see 30 or 40 cities with this new 5G technology this year alone.
Now, what are the risks to completely cutting ties with a carrier like Huawei? For instance, many rural areas rely on companies like Huawei because they tend to be much cheaper, its equipment.
That's right. And we have a proceeding ongoing right now at the FCC where we're looking at these exact issues. Is there a security threat from a particular company or from particular parts of the world? If so, what steps do we need to take? And that's an ongoing proceeding where we haven't reached a final decision yet. But even apart from that, when you think about 5G, it's going to connect more than just phone calls. It's going to be about the Internet of Things, smart cities, telehealth applications. And so part of that question is about 5G values. And when you have companies deploying these networks, do you want companies that are going to respect the rule of law, that are going to respect IP protections, that are going to respect First Amendment rights? And that's part of why we want to make sure the U.S. sees 5G first and why U.S. companies are right up there deploying these new networks.
Now, those tweets we talked about earlier not only mentioned 5G, but also pushing ahead to 6G, which is really not even existent at the most basic level. So what's your take on that?
Well, from our perspective, we're really just trying to get the regulatory playing field right to unleash this new wave of innovation, and then we'll let the private sector take it from there. 5G is a big piece of the future, but next generation broadband is actually going to take on a lot of different technological forms. There's a new generation of low Earth orbit satellites. Wireline companies are upgrading their networks. So at its core, we just want more broadband for more Americans, and 5G is going to be a piece of that. But there's other technologies out there on the horizon that we're also excited about.
So as countries around the world race to develop 5G technologies, I mean, how would you rate our administration's ability and thinking right now to secure those networks from cyber threats?
Well, right now we're in really good shape with respect to the deployment of the infrastructure, and we have agencies across the administration and independent agencies as well, very focused on this cybersecurity issues. So I think we've got the right people focused on these issues, and we're looking at it at the right time before we see 5G fully deployed.
And I want to shift gears a little bit to net neutrality. Since net neutrality has been rolled back, what type of changes have you seen from internet service providers?
It's been really great results for consumers across the country. There was a report that came out not long ago that showed that internet speeds in the U.S. are now up by 40%. The FCC itself just released a draft report that shows the digital divide is closing substantially, and there's still a lot of work to do to get more broadband deployed to hard-to-serve parts of the country. But investment is up, speeds are up, prices are down, and I spent a lot of time with the infrastructure crews, the telecom crews that are doing the hard work to actually deploy the physical infrastructure for the network. And from Florida to Iowa to Alaska, they've said they've never been busier. So I think we're really headed in the right direction now.
Can you give a little bit more detail on investments being up? Because one of the main arguments to scrap net neutrality, obviously, was that ISPs would increase investment. But capital expenditures from the Big Four most recently show that they've actually been decreasing the amount of investment.
Yeah, when you look at the end of the last administration, 2015, 2016, when the FCC imposed these Title II style regulations, investment took a pretty significant downturn for the first time out of a recession. And when you step back and look at the numbers for broadband investment across all providers right now, those numbers have turned around. And that's a great thing. And if you look as well on the infrastructure side, when the FCC started in 2017 with this big push to 5G, China was deploying new cell sites at 12 times our pace. And at the FCC, we've updated our infrastructure rules, so the private sector is now closing that gap. One provider reported that they're clearing new cell sites for construction, for instance, at 6 times the pace as before. Other providers are doubling their infrastructure deployment, so the numbers are turning around. In fact, Cisco put out a report just this week that says if you look at 5G, because of the regulatory changes the U.S. has made, the U.S. is going to see twice as many 5G connections as Asia, for instance, on a percentage basis. So the new policies the FCC has been putting in place are working, and that's going to pay off for a lot of Americans, but there's certainly more work ahead.
How do you think the scrutiny and efforts to block Huawei equipment around the world is going to ultimately impact China's ability to become the global leader in 5G?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we're very focused on trying to make sure that U.S. companies have a fair shot to compete in this space. And our number one goal at the FCC has been getting the government out of the way so they can compete. Again, China has a very different system where they can essentially snap their fingers and command new infrastructure to be built seemingly overnight. But the U.S. won the race to 4G based on our free market approach. And I'm confident that we're now in good shape to see these networks deployed, whether it's 4G, 5G, or next generation.